I've been writing a long time, and I like to think that I'm getting okay at it. But every writer has their limitations, and I definitely have two big ones that I'm working on. And I'm going to explain a bit about what they are today and see if we can kind of take anything away from it. Now, the first one is action. I'm really bad for some reason with action. I don't necessarily mean big explosions and car chases and stuff, but that is a part of it. It's kind of anything where there's lots of things happening. I'm okay with kind of inner monologue, and I'm okay with dialogue, and I'm okay with describing stuff, but when it comes to lots of people doing stuff, moving stuff, going here, doing this, I do struggle. I think part of the reason is because although I just said it's not about explosions and car chases and stuff, I don't tend to enjoy like action films and stuff like that. I don't read a lot of thrillers, so I don't have a lot of material in my head for those kinds of events. But the other thing is I find myself repeating the same few phrases. So if someone's having a fight, I'm just going to keep using my favourite way of saying that someone punched someone else, or I'm just going to use my favourite way of saying that someone fell over. And I tend to not be able to think of new ways to describe it. So that's number one. The second one is filling in the gaps. What do I mean by that? So I'll have written the main bits of my story, and I'm pretty happy with them. Got a good beginning, got a good end, got a good kind of 25% mark, got a good 75% mark, like a climax, got a good event in the midpoint. And then there's holes in between those bits, and I really can struggle to fill in those holes because I've sort of written everything that I want to say. The story's there, it kind of works. You have to use your imagination a bit, and it's not finished, but the story is, the structure of the story's there, and I'm going to really struggle to fill the 25% to 50% mark, for example. So that's number two, filling in the gaps. So action and filling in the gaps. So what I'm going to try and do now is pass on how I tackle those things. And then I've kind of got a takeaway as well at the end. So action, what do I do then? I know I'm bad at it. And that is part of it, actually. Understanding what your limitations are as a writer. I know that I'm bad with action. So that's half the battle, because I know that I'm bad at it, so I can read lots of blog posts about writing it, I can watch loads of videos about writing it. If you know your limitations, you are halfway there to solving them. With action, what I try and do, the biggest one is use it sparingly. If I'm not very good at it, I'm never going to write a book that's got loads and loads of it in. I'm going to use it as sparingly as possible. I'm going to write the sort of books where it's mainly about characters and people talking and figuring stuff out, emotions, and kind of more of a slow burning novel. I'm not going to be writing action and thrillers because that's just apparently not what I do. I have read some thrillers and stuff that I really love, but that's just not what my strength is. So I use it sparingly. And the other thing is that I will go over those bits more. So if I feel like I'm pretty good at dialogue, I can write dialogue and it doesn't have to go through many edits. Action, because I'm bad at it, will go through more edits, and I'll really hone down that part of it. I'll go over it a lot more. I'll go over it with a real fine tooth comb to try and get it right. It feels a lot more forced. It's not like as I say, I think I'm quite good at description. That will just flow out of me. Whenever you read one of my books, if it's got some description in it, there's a good chance that was basically the first draft. If you ever read a bit that's got action in it, it's probably had 20 drafts. So the other thing is that I'll try and read bits of action in other books. I'll find, say, Hunger Games, and skip to the bit where they're in the games and really have a look at how it's broken down. See what I can learn from it, see what inspiration I can get. Sometimes with action it's about finding different ways of structuring a sentence so it doesn't get boring and repetitive. Different sentence lengths, having verbs at the beginning, having verbs at the end, and really splitting it up so it's not just monotonous. So that's how I deal with action. Filling in the gaps is a lot harder. So, as I say, I've written the main bulk of the story, but there's a gap here where, they're at A and they need to get to B, and there's just a big gaping hole, and I can't think of an interesting, entertaining way to fill that gap. One of the things I do is forget the gap. Just go straight from A to C. Make it pass in the space of one sentence. You don't need to necessarily fill that gap. If someone's going from England to France, we don't necessarily need to see the ferry journey. We can just, in one sentence, explain that they're now in France, and sometimes that's okay. It's not okay if you're trying to write a novel-length book and you've got a short story length book or a novella length book. Then you do need to fill in those gaps. The other thing I'll try and do is see if one of the bits I've already written could be expanded. If it's already entertaining and interesting, see if I can expand it rather than having to fill in this gap. So let's use the England to France example again. So they need to get from England to France, but there's a gap. And I feel like for whatever reason that gap does need to be filled. Well, maybe there's an interesting conversation that I've already written over here, and maybe that scene's got slightly too much in it. Well, let's take that conversation out, put it on the ferry, and suddenly that gap is filled. A lot of the time when I can't think of a way to fill that gap, it's because in reality there is no way to fill that gap with new content. I need to use existing content, and that's why my brain isn't filling that gap, because it knows that the content already exists. It's not going to try and invent new content for that ferry ride, because it knows that that conversation, somehow through the magic of the subconscious, it knows that conversation over here would be better suited to the ferry. Bingo, the gap has been filled. The other thing with having a gap and wanting to fill it is sometimes the reason you can't think of a way to fill it is because we've got this A to B, the England to France, but actually that's not the best direction for the story. They shouldn't be going from England to France. They should be staying in England for whatever reason. Obviously this is a very specific example, but what I'm saying is sometimes you can't think of a reason to fill that gap because the gap shouldn't even be there. There's something else that needs to go on. You want to go from A to C, the C is the wrong C, find a different C, and suddenly that gap becomes a lot easier to fill because the direction is now correct. Now the biggest takeaway I want to give you for this video is that you should know what your limitations are. Very few writers are going to be able to write everything brilliantly and get it all on the page first time. Some of the elements of writing are going to be harder for you than others. Work out what those ones are, spend more time on them, research them more, read more examples of that particular thing in other works of fiction, watch blog posts about it, search on Google for it, see how other people tackle it and how other people struggle against it and what they do to remedy it. Figure out what you're the best at and what you're not so good at, and see if you can get all the skills on the skill tree as high as possible. And if you can't, just spend longer on those bits that you find harder, and eventually, so here's the stuff you're good at and it's already brilliant first time, and here's the stuff you're not so good at, but if we spend a bit more time on this one, then there we go, it's all good, all gold, and everybody's happy. So I hope you found that useful. What are you not so good at? Let me know in the comments. Maybe I can help. Maybe I've already got a video on it. Maybe I could make a video about it. What are you not so good at? What are you best at? I'd like to know. I would say I'm best at character, maybe. I like coming up with characters. Thanks for watching, guys. Check out these two videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.